Hey everybody, welcome to another match in the Centurion, this time in the Cent 7-1. We've ended up on steps, platooned up with Hardest and Southern Dandy, and we've got the North Spawn. As is usual for North Spawn steps, playing in a medium tank, I'm going to be heading out to the west side of the map with Hardest. As you can see, top tier, tier 9. This was during my attempt to set a tier 10 tank on fire, and I did not see a single tier 10 tank for hours on end. Hardest is not paying attention apparently, and we both crash into each other. I think he said he was looking at something off screen or whatever, but either way, our collision appears to have confused the game into thinking we're puppies, because it gave both of us some very nice RNG on those snapshots they wouldn't normally have hit. I wait for the FCM to back up. I can tell he's going uphill, and sure enough, the thing is as long as a bus, and the back end of his tank hangs over the top of the hill. He obviously doesn't want any more of that, but it's too late, he's not getting away. Take a big hit there from the Roomba. Playing a little risky by staying this high up on the slope. I was hoping to get a shot back into him there, but he pulled back behind a rock and all I could see was his gun barrel, so there wasn't much point. Aside from the IS-8, who is lagging quite a long way behind, our team seems to be pushing pretty firmly on this flank. The enemy didn't really send anything to defend it, but they've got a Jagdpunter and a Patton in the middle of the map pushing down the alley there. And they've run into our KV-5. Now, as much as I'd like to try and keep the KV-5 alive and put some damage on those two, I have to be really careful here because the Roomba, E75 and Nerva all have shots to my left. If I pop up trying to aim at the two enemies in the trench there, there's a very high probability I'm going to take a couple shells to the side. Not something you want in a Centurion. So, while keeping one eye on the mini-map, I don't know how that missed, and the other on the tanks in front of me, I worked my way up and down the slope, looking for shots where I can take them. Missed a chance there at the Patton, unfortunately. But again, I don't want to risk rolling too far out of cover and getting hit from my left side. At this point, I come up for a snapshot. Should have probably let that aim in for another moment. I would have got him. Hardest and I bump into each other again. And that's one of the occupational hazards of using auto-aim for long-range shots. Sometimes it goes for engine decks or tracks instead of places it will pen. However, like I've said before, it is useful for maintaining situational awareness of what's going on immediately around you. If you're trying to engage a tank while also trying to avoid getting hit from a different direction, it's useful. And if you have a high ping and have issues tracking targets at long range, sometimes because of it, it's useful. If you have a high enough shell velocity, which the Centurion certainly does. I can't say it isn't a good substitute for actual proper aiming though, so don't get carried away with it. We're beginning to clean up this flank, but the west is pretty much gone. All that's left is the AMX M4 and the AT-15. For now, I just want to roll in and clear up stuff in the enemy base, and in doing so keep the teammates down here alive for as long as possible. It's much easier to carry a game when you still have other teammates up, either to actually help you with their guns or just purely as cannon fodder, than it is to try and fight a larger number of tanks without support. Unfortunately, they do still have an active T-30, and a lot of the tanks that are with me are low enough on health that the T-30 can deal with them quite handily. The M53-55 takes a shotgun at me and just misses, but manages to track me. My shot at the T-30's cupola bounces, wasn't very well aimed. Thankfully he goes to the Tiger and not me, which gives me a chance to roll up on him and finish him off. I check back to make sure those other two tank destroyers don't have a shot on me at the moment, and then decide to go after the 53-55 before he can reload and shotgun at me again and potentially hit me. I can tell he's setting up for one, but he doesn't get a shot off. By now, Dandy is pretty much done for. The Tortoise and the T-29 have made their way up to the top left corner of the map. Our AMX M4 begins shit-talking everyone for not being able to stop them, I guess. I don't know what he expected. We were busy on the other flank of the map. And I wasn't about to cross in front of a T-30, a Roomba, and a T-28 just to run back and save him. Now they've all been dealt with though, this is much easier. Tell the IS-60 are on cap, thankfully he's smart enough to fucking do it. While I head back, and the IS-8 kinda mills around pointlessly for a moment. Defend the base, says the AT-15. Now remember that AT-15 said to defend the base because in about 2 minutes he's going to tell us to cap fast. I head back up the trench to avoid exposing myself for as long as possible and immediately see a potential hull down spot here. See, just stay on cap, he says. So in less than a minute he's changed his mind from us all defending our cap to IS-6 stay on cap while we defend, and in a few more seconds you'll see him tell us that we're idiots and we should be on cap. Which of course wouldn't work, because there you go, get another tank onto cap. It wouldn't work because if we tried to get back to the cap to help the IS-6, it would take us too long. Particularly a Centurion, I'm not fast enough to do that, nor is the IS-8. What we can do is continually reset these two while the IS-6 caps in safety. Unfortunately for our AT-15, he doesn't realise that. Probably doesn't realise what game he's playing either, if I'm honest. Get back to the cap, you two boneheads, says the AT-15, obviously with some level of insight into World of Tanks strategy that I lack. All I need is for the IS-8 to get a single shot out of the Tortoise, so he's on reload, or not pointing at me, or in this case both, and the Tortoise is down. Game's won. I was hoping to tag the 29 as well, but unfortunately just didn't have the chance. Pretty cruisy game, just shy of 5k damage. And a good example of just how little pubbies know about how to play this game. You don't tell somebody to defend their own base and then all get on the enemy cap within about a minute of each other. It's just beyond stupid. And myself in the IS-8 obviously had that situation handled anyway. One thing it's worth noting, I forgot to actually show it. I noticed this as I was rewatching this replay earlier to try and get it to run smoothly. The Tortoise actually penned me through my gun mantlet. His first shot winged off the left side of the turret, just next to the gun mantlet, which is of course an occupational hazard now in the Descent. The gun mantlet shrank considerably with the HD remodel of the tank, so it's much less likely now for the mantlet to eat incoming shots, and much more likely for them to hit the thinly armoured turret face. That's not a problem though, that happens, especially at close range against an accurate gun like the Tortoise, although he probably wasn't deliberately aiming for it. What really surprised me was one of the shots that penned me came in through my mantlet right in the thickest part of it, even though a shot which had bounced earlier hit me in the corner where it's much thinner. So, I don't know, I think maybe there's a gap in the... not a gap in the mantlet, but it's slightly thinner because it was the part where the coaxial gun usually penetrates through, so I'm guessing that there's a space behind, if you look at the mantlet from the back, for example. But either way, it just went straight through, which is a far cry from what the Sense mantle it used to be before the HD remodel. It would eat anything that was shot at it. A hull down Scent used to be practically invincible. Now they're much, much easier to pen, and it can't rely on its armor nearly as much. I think the Scent is still a very strong tank, but I think it's been left behind somewhat. I've brought up the issue of power creep before. It's only getting worse. In fact, the power creep is getting really, really fucking obnoxious now, and the ultimate expression of it perhaps is the Waffenträger E100, which thankfully is getting removed. But all the same, the Centurion with the L7A1 has the lowest DPM of any Tier 9 medium tank since the Leopard prototype was buffed. It does have a lot of hit points, and it has good armor on paper, but the armor is not nearly as effective as it used to be. So you've got a very large target that's not very fast. It's agile, but it's not fast. With the lowest DPM in tier for a medium tank. Now, it might have a very hard-hitting good gun, but looking at the Leopard prototype and the Type 61, which have comparable guns, the Centurion's just getting left behind. So what I think Wargaming should probably do is either buff the rate of fire slightly on the L7A1, or find some other way to give the Centurion its edge back a bit. I think a rate of fire buff would be perfectly fine, just up it a little bit. Nothing too crazy. I think at the moment it sits around 1900 DPM, something like that, and most of the Tier 9 mediums are sitting around between 22 and 2500. So bring it up to about, I don't know, 2100, 2200, I think that would be fine. That won't imbalance the tank at all. The other thing they could potentially do, I suppose, is just look at adjusting the armor on the turret. I know that they want to do the whole historical accuracy thing on one hand, and then pretend the game is balanced conventionally on the other, but I mean, they've made concessions for balance before. The 4502's front armor is about twice as thick as it should be. The Tiger 2's frontal armor scheme has also been different than what it historically was for most of the game's history. And I think they buffed a lot of other tanks armor-wise in ways that aren't really historically correct, or at least, kind of selectively historical. For instance, the Panther. Now, I can't remember if they buffed the Panther or not, but I seem to recall there being one version of the Panther's hull that has 85mm of armor in this game. Now, the Panther's designed hull armor was 80mm thick. They varied from about 75 to 85 because the Germans just had no uniformity in their production techniques at all. It was a production line, like a craftsman's workshop type thing. It wasn't mass production as we recognize it now. And so no two Panthers were alike, and no two Panthers were the same measurements, so you literally could not take spare parts from one tank and put it on another because they wouldn't fit. The British had the same problem with a lot of their wartime tanks, including the Comet. There was actually an episode of Tank Restoration, or some tank restoration show, where they were trying to restore a Comet that had been used as a firing range target, and they cut the front off of another Comet and actually had to do quite a bit of cutting and re-welding to get it to fit because the two tanks were different dimensions. Same thing with the German tanks, and so Wargaming can kind of selectively say, oh well, we'll just take the 85mm as standard and use that in the game, or they could potentially go the other way. So I don't know why they can't do that with the Centurion and give it a little bit of armor back, or resize the mantlet a little bit, and just give it something, I think. Of course I'm going to advocate for buffs to this tank because it's my most played tank and I like it a lot, but I do think that if they're going to continue allowing power creep to heavily skew the game in favour of newer tanks, then they should start addressing it by improving the old ones. Or the other alternative is to nerf the shit out of all the new tanks and stop trying to wow people with each tank being more powerful than the last. It's getting out of hand. A lot of the tanks that have been more or less untouched since the game's release are really obviously hurting, because the newer stuff is just so much better. Now, a lot of the newer tanks just render the old stuff obsolete, completely irrelevant, so it definitely needs looking at. Quite frankly, I'd be glad to see Wargaming spend like 6 months or more not putting out any new content at all, just balancing the fucking tanks to do something about power creep. Unfortunately, I doubt most World of Tanks players would be happy with that. They'd probably cry if there's no new content for more than a couple months at a time, so I don't see it happening. Wargaming did say, I think like 2 years ago now, they were going to embark on a serious rebalancing and that it would take them a while to do and they wouldn't put out any new content in that time, but obviously that idea went out the window. But we'll have to see what we get. I really hope it does happen at some point though. Especially it's one thing that power creep's a problem. The other thing is, because the HD models almost universally mean armor nerfs, it means that the tanks which get HD remodels are typically fucked over. The T-3485 was the only major exception I can think of, because its armor scheme was actually pretty much on the money already. It's very simple. But a lot of the other tanks, like the T-54, for example, its turret, the Centurion's turret, a lot of them are going to be losing a lot of armor with these model updates, simply because tank armor isn't that uniform in real life, particularly cast armor and things like that. It varies. Sometimes it varies from one tank to the next, let alone, just production concessions, basically. So, I don't know, we'll have to see what they do. I'm really hoping that they address it, though. And I almost want to say that I wish they had held off on the updated armor models. Like, they could have updated the visual models, but left the armor models untouched until they were all done. I think that might have been a bit fairer, but at the end of the day, what's done is done. And hopefully they will find some way of working around it that's a bit less obnoxious, a bit more sensible. Anyway, thanks for watching, thanks for listening to me rant about pointless bullshit nobody cares about. I've got one more replay after this of my own, and then I want to record some other Goons replays, including matches in the T28 concept and some pretty crazy shit. So stay tuned for those. Thank you as ever for sticking around and watching, and I wish you the best of luck in the field. See you next time.